be screwed. Feel my own adrenaline, yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 49th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Be viewy quiet, said Lockhart in a half-whisper, holding a vertical finger to his lips. We don't want to upset them. He gave a small self-satisfied laugh, hehehehe. No one dared to breathe as Lockhart whipped off the cover off the cage in a single, smooth action. Yes, he said theatrically, waving the hand without the cover. Freshly caught Cornish pixies. Harry was unsure of how to take the man's odd pronouncement. He had the inane thought of, was he a Pegasus fish hawker, cross his mind. Still, they didn't look all that dangerous, and the encyclopedia on creatures that his mom had bought referred to them as pests that were easily handled. The pixies were small, only about 8 inches high. They were electric blue and had pointed faces. Their voices were shrill and unpleasant. They were like human versions of the breezies back home, except violent and menacing. As soon as they saw the class, they started chattering and zooming around their cage. They rattled the metal door and made scary faces at everyone who looked at them. Seamus Finnegan, who should have known better, let out a snort of laughter. Yes. Lockhart turned and smiled at Seamus. There was something a bit sinister about the smile, Harry thought. What does he know that we don't? Well, they're not very dangerous, are they? Seamus managed to choke out between snickers. Are you sure? Said Lockhart, waggling a finger, his other hand on his waist. Appearances can be deceiving, after all, he said, nodding his head slightly as he spoke. Harry remembered the story his mom had told him about the parasprites that had eaten Ponyville. They had looked harmless, and ponies had even wanted to make them pets. These pixies did not look harmless. Anything but harmless, actually. He was starting to get nervous, and his herdmates were echoing his anxiety, he could see. He palmed his wand in his lap, and nudged his herdmates to either side. He made a point of looking down at his wand when they looked at him. Ready? Lockhart said loudly, smirking. Let's see what you make of these not very dangerous creatures. He yanked open the cage with a flourish, and stepped back against the wall. Harry immediately cast the strongest protection shield he could between the oncoming pixies and himself and his herdmates. Sweetie Belle cast hers a moment later, covering their heads. Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were a bit slower, but seeing what their herdmates had done, they quickly covered their sides. Hermione beat Ginny to covering their backs. Then they took a moment to survey the classroom. Chaos. Sheer chaos. Discord would have loved it. In fact, Harry had a feeling he might be watching right now with popcorn. He had probably been watching every class with the pixies. He might even have invited Pinkie Pie. The pixies were everywhere, moving so rapidly they were almost blurs. Several had seized Neville by the ears and his robes and were hoisting him up. Several were floating, dazed, by the back window. The windows had clearly been reinforced to prevent their escape. The rest were trying, and succeeding, at wrecking the classroom. Ink bottles were flying, spraying the class with their contents, pages from shredded books and parchments were drifting like giant snowflakes, pictures from the wall were flying like frisbees, one student was wearing the upended waste basket, and rucksacks, their contents, and books flew everywhere. Half the class was unsuccessfully trying to hide under their desks while the others were huddled together in corners. Poor Neville was clutching desperately to the swinging iron chandelier in the ceiling. It was creaking ominously. Professor Lockhart had his back to the wall at the front of the room, and used his wand to swat any pixies that came close, flinging the pests across the room. "Come now, they aren't dangerous, are they?" he taunted. "Round them up, they're only harmless pixies," Lockhart gleefully shouted. The man was a bit sadistic, Harry thought approvingly. The DADA professor should be scaring the pants off his students. Hermione nodded to Ginny, dropped her shield, and began sniping the little monsters with a freezing spell as Ginny did the same to any pixie that approached Hermione. Following her lead, the other four crowded closer together and dropped their shields. Then they started sweeping the pixies out of the air, and banishing their frozen or stunned victims into the cage. The rest of the class, seeing what they were doing, pitched in, and soon they were pixie-free. "So," Professor Lockhart said into the silent room full of panting, shocked students, and grinned broadly. "Still think pixies are not very dangerous?" He paused a second. "For harmless creatures, they sure routed you bunch, didn't they?" he said, gloating a little. The iron chandelier crashed to the ground in front of his desk, with Neville landing beside it. "That was pitiful," the professor said, shaking his head. "Start putting things to right." He ordered and waved his wand at the chandelier, saying loudly, "Reparo." It rose up to the ceiling and reattached itself. That left Neville on the floor, groaning and rubbing his head. Lockhart looked at the rest of the class. "Well," he said, hands on his waist. 5 minutes later, the damage was repaired and the students were once more taking their seats. "Right," Lockhart said firmly, leaning back against his table. "First, 5 points to each of the animagi for reacting first and quickest." The girls all blushed. "Second, what did you all do wrong?" What followed was a discussion on how they had underestimated the swarm of pixies. Yes, 1 pixie wasn't much of an issue, but 30? They discussed how they could have done things differently, how they should have reacted, and what might have been good tactics to use. As they were leaving the classroom after the bell, Lockhart added, "Remember, don't tell anyone what happened. We wouldn't want to give an advantage to the others, now, would we?" Harry could hear the enthusiasm in his voice at the prospect of humiliating more students who thought the pixies offered no challenge. His concluding laugh was disturbingly evil-sounding. He had an almost grudging admiration for the wizard's antics. It was, without a doubt, the most interesting and informative class they had ever had. There were no doubts that they all would remember that lesson. Just because a creature doesn't look dangerous doesn't mean it can't hurt you, now, does it? However, that was their last class of the day. They had the rest free until tea, and they took advantage of it. They headed out to the lawn. It was a wonderful late afternoon in the sun, and fit their longing to ignore assignments. They could easily handle those, after tea, with a little bookwalking for refresh their memories, and then writing out the results of that. They would finish before lights out without difficulties. In the meantime, they would bask in the warmth while it was still available. It wasn't long before Ginny and Scutellin noticed several Pegasi swooping overhead, and shot up to join them. The trebuchets were making a steady swoosh as they flung students out over the lake. All the first highs were enthralled at that new recreation. The giant squid was fishing them out of the water and flinging them back towards land, making sure they hit the water and not the shore, of course. Several of the Pegasi were transforming while in the air and performing loops, stoops, and spirals. They could see Colin by the large crowd that had gathered around him. This time he was doing his shooting where the castle was in the background, not just the entrance courtyard. Harry was amused to see several students wanting repeats, with their friends in the picture, too. The little wizard was going to be making some serious money with his little hobby. Not to mention the connections he was making. Not that he would realize that for a few years. Then Luna came over, having finally found them. Someone had given her sunglasses, which was probably the only reason why she was outside. Otherwise, it would have been painfully bright for her nocturnally adapted eyes. They took turns, and the rest of the afternoon, teaching her how to initiate her animagus form and return. Once she succeeded, she was again swarmed by ponies and people admiring her crystal-appearing fur and skin, and the way she glittered and shone, especially when flying. Then it was back to the Gryffindor dorm to freshen up for dinner. As Harry had suspected, there were 2 new rules posted beside the entrance, on the inside. 12. All students are to remain fully clothed outside of their dorms. A. And outside of the bathrooms in their own dorms. B. And said clothing is to include underwear. C. Students are not allowed to attend class in animagus forms to get around the requirement to be dressed. 13. Students are not allowed to summon the equestrian royal guard to detain the inhabitants of the Forbidden Forest. A. The centaurs are not going to drain anybody's magic. B. Yes. We are absolutely certain centaurs do not steal people's magic. C. Or ponies' magic. D. No pony, person, or other creature is allowed to approach any of the centaurs in the Forbidden Forest for any reason whatsoever on penalty of being suspended from Hogwarts and sent home for 1 week. E. Yes, we know there are unicorns in the forest. No, they do not need the equestrian royal guard to protect them from the centaurs. They were not long into their evening meal when the headmaster and his mum came through the open great hall doors. He had expected her to show up today. After all, he had sent Hedwig off with a letter last night before curfew. He knew she would want to know right away about Discord's mischief. His only surprise was in that she hadn't immediately shown up this morning. He stood and waved when she started looking around the hall to find him. While she knew which table belonged to Gryffindor, she didn't know exactly where he was at the table. That, and she could no longer just look for the bright hair colors of his herdmates as distinguishing features, considering all the other equestrians at all the tables. All the new equestrians sort of interfered with that. Smiling broadly, she headed for him, the headmaster only a step behind. The moment she was close enough, they hugged. The 3 fillies quickly joined them. More hesitantly, so did Hermione and Ginny. After exchanging greetings, his mum leaned back. So, Discord, she said, pulling her mouth to the side unhappily. He grimaced and turned to Luna, who was watching with wide eyes only a few seats away. Mum, I'd like to introduce Luna Lovegood, he said, stepping over to her and uncurling his arm to present her to his mum. Luna Lovegood, this is my mum, Her Royal Highness, Princess Twilight Sparkle, Princess of Friendship, MSTRS of Magic, Bearer of the Element of Magic, Savior of Equestria, Liberator of the Crystal Empire, Biggest egghead ever. His mum glared at him, her hands on her hips. He smirked. Prince Blueblood says that proper etiquette must be followed for all introductions regarding royalty, and those are your titles, Mum. She sighed and rolled her eyes. With Princess Celestia making that last one part of her royal title, there really wasn't anything she could do about it except complain. Rainbow still went into giggles every time she heard it. Then the royal turned her attention to Luna. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Lovegood. Luna blinked owlishly, then quickly scrambled from the bench and curtsied as she said, the pleasure is all mine, Your Royal Highness. She straightened and nervously glanced at Harry, and the headmaster who was behind them all. He grinned at her. I sent an owl last night explaining how you got your animagus form. Yes, interrupted his mum, moving over to inspect Luna, craning her neck side to side. Would you mind showing me? The headmaster said we can use a room just down the hall from the Great Hall, here. Luna glanced at her plate, of course, Your Highness. Excellent, cried his mum. She glanced at the girl's plate. The portions on the plate were quickly doubled from the nearby platters, then the plate and her juice goblet floated up. She turned, nodded to the headmaster, and they started back towards the doors, the plate and glass floating over her head. Harry quickly grabbed his own plate, scooped up a few extra helpings and his goblet, before following them. The girls were not far behind him. Just before they reached the doors, Myrtle joined them. She was a part of the family, now, even if it wasn't official. Seeing everyone else in the family was there, except Spike, she didn't want to miss anything. If nothing else, it gave her some wonderful gossip if it wasn't private. Almost at the same time, another person came trotting in literally. Luna, exclaimed his mum in surprise. Yes, said the little love-good girl, looking over from the imposing visage that had just come in. You couldn't have waited 5 minutes. Princess Luna said, staring disapprovingly at Twilight, eye to eye. She was in her alicorn form, a deep blue coat with a quarter-moon emblem on the black pétrole on her chest. Her mane was a lighter blue, but sparkled and glittered as if tiny stars were embedded in it. Her crown was black as night. The hall behind them gasped at her appearance, but went silent. His mum rolled her eyes. Discord, she said by way of explanation. Yes, Luna said reflectively. That would imply a bit of haste, we suppose, she mused. Is this the little witch with our name? She asked imperiously, looking at the only person in the group she hadn't met. Luna, the girl, stared at the giant pony with wide eyes. Harry sighed. This is Luna Lovegood, again gently uncurling his arm to indicate her with a sweeping gesture. Luna Lovegood, this is her eternal majesty, Princess Luna, Mstrs of the stars and moon, bringer of the night, guardian of dreams and destroyer of nightmares, bane of evil, defender and grand general of the realm, matriarch of the night ponies, monarch of unicorns, counselor of earth ponies, commander of the Pegasi, and co-ruler of Equestria and all their other realms and territories. He was getting quite good at this sort of thing, he thought wryly. Blueblood would be pleased and would still critique his stance and presentation. Luna the girl stared a second, then shook herself. She curtsied once more. A pleasure to meet you, your majesty. Good, Harry thought, she had picked up on the co-ruler in the introduction. We shall see, the princess replied. That wasn't nearly as good. The moment they were out of sight beyond the doors, the hall broke into an excited chatter. Professor McGonagall came hurrying out to join them not a minute later. The volume of noise from the great hall rose even higher. They quickly made their way to the same meeting room they had used last year when Twilight made her first impromptu visit, courtesy of Philomena. It didn't take long for Luna the girl to repeat the story of her encounter with the god of chaos the previous day. Both princesses paid close attention. His mum hung on the girl's every word, walking back and forth in front of the girl, asking questions. Luna the pony spent the time stalking around the girl, examining her from every angle, with a spell or two added. Then it was everyone else's turn to explain what they had seen, and what they had told the girl about ponies. His mum stopped and stared intently at the girl. Would you please turn into your new form? Have you learned how to change back and forth, yet? She transformed into her alicorn form. Luna the girl's eyes darted around at everyone watching. The headmaster was smiling lightly, his eyes sparkling. Professor McGonagall was just watching curiously. Seeing the girl's hesitation, she gave a small nod. Luna the girl slowly nodded back as the students all told how they had taught her how to transform at will earlier in the day. A second later, there was the appealing pony they had seen earlier. Both princesses were delighted and excited, and the diagnostic spells filled the air for a few minutes. Amazing, breathed his mum. You have the wings, ears, and eyes of a night pony, but the crystal pony attributes that make you translucent. Harry jolted slightly. He had noticed her eyes were faceted like a crystal pony, but he hadn't noticed that they were slitted eyes, like a night pony, while having hexagonal facets. Nor had he noticed how much larger than the other ponies her ears were, which was rather remarkable as they were almost as oversized as a fennec fox's. Her wings and crystal coat had been too distracting. Princess Luna muttered a soft, remarkable, indeed, and nodded. And it goes right down to the genetics, his mum continued as she looked into the girl's eyes. Your pony children will be just as healthy as you are. Say what you will about Discord, Luna the pony said dryly, but he does do good work. His mum sat back and frowned, deep in thought, while Luna the pony examined Luna the girl's wings. She cooed at how pretty the filly looked, the feel of her wings' membranes, and murmured about how so much like a regular night pony she was in overall build, if not appearance. Twilight suddenly stood up. Scoots, Sweetie, Bloom, would you all stand there? She pointed to one side. Myrtle, would you stand there? She pointed to where she wanted the girl to stand. Miss Lovegood? Would you return to your normal form? She then cast a series of spells on Myrtle, Luna the girl, and the CMC fillies. She chewed her lower lip as she studied the results. She turned to where Harry, Hermione, and Ginny had grouped. Perfect. Just stay where you are. And they were included in the next batch of spells. She turned to Professor McGonagall. Would you please stand there for a moment? She pointed to a fourth spot, and repeated her spells. She sighed deeply. Okay. Could you all take your animagus forms? She swept her gaze across the entire group. It was another round of spell casting on the various ponies and cat. Twilight sat a moment longer, then started pacing. After a few moments, she stopped. Albus? Is there someone else in the school who learned how to be an animagus in the traditional manner? Eyes sparkling, he said, why, yes, I believe there is. A moment later there was a goat standing where he had stood. A Nigerian dwarf goat, breathed Hermione in surprise. Excellent, exclaimed his mum, again, and started casting spells. Now, change to your animagi forms. The only one left as a human in the room was Myrtle. Finally, Twilight stopped. She turned to face Myrtle. Would you like to be a unicorn, a pegasus, or an earth pony? Myrtle glanced around the room at the various ponies. Scootaloo and Ginny perked up and promptly spread their wings. A pegasus, she said hesitantly. Twilight nodded firmly. Bear with me, this should only take a moment. She stared at the girl intently. A glow began to suffuse the entire room. Harry felt something inside, for a very brief moment. His connection to when they had revived Myrtle. There was a bright flash. When it faded, his mum was panting heavily, and a bit wobbly on her hooves. Oh, that might have been a bit too much, she slurred. Princess Luna was at her side, instantly, a soft glow holding the purple pony upright. She sighed, Chui, she said exasperatedly. Just because you figured it out doesn't mean you should try it immediately. Next time, just show us the spell, and we will do it. We have the power to spare. Aha, Twilight said sleepily, and yawned prodigiously. The rest of them were staring at the new Pegasus. Oh, my, she said quietly, then grinned, delighted. It feels exactly like when I'm in Equestria. She glanced at her wing as she stretched it out. Except with wings. She started tentatively flapping them and slowly rose a short distance above the floor. She let herself drop down as the other two Pegasi rushed to her. She ecstatically cantered in place, then sighed and abruptly returned to human. She turned to the other fillies. Okay, how do I turn back? Princess Luna, still propping up Twilight, who was now snoring lightly, looked over at not Princess Luna. We approve wholeheartedly of your animagus form. We shall have to see if that is also your form in Equestria. We suspect it might not be, that you might still have the unicorn form you have already exhibited. She glanced at Dumbledore. Just as the headmaster is a unicorn in Equestria, yet he still retains his older animagus form. She looked back at Luna the girl. You and your family are invited to visit us at Canterlot Palace this hearth-warming holiday. In the meantime, we will send a night pony to help you adjust to your new senses and abilities. She paused a moment, then said, Fare thee well, as she turned to Albus, still a goat. We will see ourselves and Chui to the gates. She turned and left the room, his mum floating behind her, snoring. Having so many equestrians willing to transform into their animagi form changed the common room dynamic. Harry and his herdmates were no longer the centers of attention, he was happy to see. Luna, naturally, was the most popular pony. Everyone wanted to see if her coat was soft like fur or hard like crystal. It was soft like fur, but was translucent and glittered like crystal. There were dark sections scattered across her body, but her internal organs were not on display, despite being able to see the broad outlines and colors of the people, and the room's furnishings, through her. Somehow the imagery behind her was transmitted to her other side, as if she were see-through, like a translucent window. The younger ponies did seem to prefer being close to older ones, though, despite them actually being older than Harry's herdmates. Probably because Harry and the herd were seen as experienced, and would protect them. That, and the fact that Harry was part of the royal family. As were his herdmates by association, if not yet fact. Being nice to the potential royals was always a good strategy. In the meantime, regarding safety, if Harry and the other three weren't alarmed, then it must be okay was the consensus. That there were also nearly equal numbers of equestrians in the other houses meant that this year there were no visitors from the other dorms at all, which considerably decreased the crowding in the common room. Now that he wasn't being singled out, it was hilarious to watch the Frnds getting blissed out at all the attention they were receiving. Actually, as Harry looked around, the common room seemed even less crowded than he had expected. Had it expanded to accommodate the increased number of students, as the Frnds room had been expanded with extra beds and more room? The next morning started with History of Magic, which used to be taught by a ghost. Professor Lupin had taken over the position last year. Professor Binns, the previous professor of magical history, had been a ghost and taught the course for over a century. Last year, he had realized he had actually died during his tenure as a professor, and had never noticed. The CMC had never seen a ghost until they were at Hogwarts, and under their questioning he had finally noticed his deceased state. With that discovery on his part, he had gone off to his next great adventure, as the headmaster had termed it. His replacement, Professor Remus Lupin, had periodically brought in the ghosts in the castle, and other places, to take turns speaking about their lives and the times they had lived in. It was so much more interesting to listen to someone talk about a historical incident when they had lived through it. Not to mention that some of them actually knew the villains or heroes that their textbook discussed. Professor Lupin's approach to teaching had been greatly appreciated, once they all got over their disappointment at losing their scheduled nap time. It was rather ironic that their professor was using ghosts to bring the past to life for the students in the present. His robes were standard professorial ones in much better condition this year than they had been last year. That, no doubt, was due to Sirius' influence. Remus, too, introduced new professorial aides, except both of them were 7th-year students. Naturally, an equestrian would have been of no help at all in this class. Duh. Unfortunately, the longer a werewolf had been afflicted with the curse, the more habits she, or he, had to try to correct. Even Remus, who had lived so much among muggles, had a few habits that were hard to break. His temper and lassitude during the times of a normal full moon would be a problem for him for some time to come, Sirius had told Harry. Pavlov's dogs, you know, he had said wryly. Which had led into an explanation about how physical reactions become ingrained to visual and auditory stimuli and very difficult to break. The next class was Charms. It was as interesting as ever. They started with a comprehensive look at last year's textbook. Professor Phileas Flitwick was a tiny little wizard with white hair and green robes, who could look a pony straight in the eyes. He was quite affable, and spent the entire lesson revising the previous year's charms with them. He was more than a little surprised at just how much they did remember. On the other hoof, Harry was gratified to hear at the end of the class, that they already had covered almost a third of the material for 2nd year. Celestia bless bookwalking. That meant that after the revising in the next 2 weeks, they would already be that far through this year. With luck and perseverance, they might even be able to make their way through the 3rd year spells before they finished 2nd year. They would definitely be setting records when their OWLs came around. After lunch was potions. Which was actually had a bit of a surprise. Instead of Professor Snape, there was an enormously fat, short, bald, old man wearing a wizarding suit instead of robes. His belly was so large that the buttons on his waistcoat appeared to be ready to burst off. He had prominent, gooseberry-colored eyes, and an enormous, silver, walrus-like mustache. He was grinning broadly as they entered the room. Standing with him was a Ravenclaw, a blonde-haired, upper-year student, one Harry had never met. Beside him was a buxom equestrian. An equestrian he and his equestrian herdmates immediately identified. Her hair was black and white striped in a mohawk style. She wore 2 gold earrings, 1 in each ear, with 5 gold rings tight to her neck and a matching set of 5 on her left arm. Her face was a bit squarer than the other equestrians Harry had seen. It was Zekra. All 3 fillies yelled her name at the same time and charged forward to hug her. After a moment, the professor shooed them away and they quickly found seats. Apple Bloom and Ginny took one table, Harry and Hermione had the next, and Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo were behind Harry's table. Harry wondered if her animagus form was a zebra, like she was in Equestria. The zebras from Zebraca didn't seem to have overt magic like the ponies did, relying primarily on rituals and potions. However, most wizards and witches seemed to have the capability, even if they never learned how to do it. Zekra, he thought, should be able to manage the animagus transformation. He would suggest, later, she explore that option. Once everyone was in place, the wizard started off with, "I am Professor Horace Slughorn. I will be teaching this class, as well as the other classes leading up to your OWLs." He turned and nodded to the wizard at his side. "This is Mr. Wittershins, and he will normally handle the Wednesday classes." He turned to Zekra. "And this lovely witch is Zekra, an equestrian. While she is a potions MSTR in Equestria, she will be observing my classes as she learns how potions are created and used here in England. She will be helping the 2 of us in our classes." He rubbed his hands together. "So," he said jovially, "shall we see how much you remember from last year?" What followed was a class-long question and answer session where every student received at least some attention. It was clear from the way his expression occasionally fell that the class was not where he wanted it to be. His lapses were just as frequent when he was questioning the Slytherins as with the Gryffindors. Neither side of the class was happy with the other hearing their faults. The end of class came none too soon for Ron and Neville, or Goyle and Crabbe. Although both sets of boys had snickered at the other's mistakes, all 4 were exchanging relieved looks as they left the classroom. Truthfully, the entire class was relieved. This was one of a mere handful of times they had left potions without fleeing an explosion, enduring another melted cauldron from Neville, or the subjects of yet another Sweetie Belle potion gone wrong. Not to mention their attendant ear-blistering and soul-destroying tantrums from Professor Snape. No one would miss those. Just as relieving had been knowing they would be revising safety rules and proper cutting and stirring procedures for the next 2 weeks. No disasters for 2 weeks, guaranteed, led to quiet celebrations. Many exchanged high-fives, while looking over at Sweetie Belle, as they left the class. Friday afternoon, after lunch and before charms, they had a free PRD. Harry decided to take advantage of that and went down to visit Hagrid. Ron, Neville, his herdmates, and Luna went along. Harry, the half-giant delightedly said as he came around the edge of his wooden cottage. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he continued genially. "Like a spot of tea." Once they were all settled in a row on his bed, he didn't have nearly enough chairs for 9 visitors. "Have a good summer, did ya?" he asked as he set the kettle on the fire. After bringing him up on their adventures over the summer, and their classes so far, Harry asked, "Hagrid, can you get acromantula silk?" The wizard shrugged his shoulders. "There's plenty about Aragog's abandoned nest," he said. Harry explained how there was a shortage of the product in Equestria, and how Hagrid could make some extra galleons. Hagrid glanced around his cottage. "Don't really need a lot of galleons," he said, thinking on it. "I don't spend most what I earn, already. Got pretty much all I need, right here," he waved his arm to indicate his cottage, "already. But you need to save some for the future, when you retire," Hermione piped up, and sipped some tea from her cup, more of a bowl considering it was a teacup for a half-giant. Hagrid nodded, furrowing his brow. "That's true, I suppose." "Well," Harry said slowly, musing, "you could make a deal with Aragog on behalf of the school. You could use the funds to help fix up some of the things here at the school. Surely there's stuff that needs to be replaced or fixed, or even just touched up a bit." Hermione nodded. There seem to be a lot of unused classrooms in the school that are in dreadful need of a cleaning. Obviously, there's too much work to be done for the house elves to manage everything, and heaven knows that Mr. Filch is overworked with what he does. Perhaps you could use the extra income to hire additional help for the school. My mum mentioned that the headmaster told her the budget was tight at Hogwarts, Harry said earnestly, which is one reason why they don't offer more electives and have a bigger staff. Hagrid slowly nodded. That's true. I've heard the professors ask for more funding in staff meetings more than once. Besides, put in Apple Bloom, someday you might get married and you'll need a lot of galleons to expand and outfit the cottage for two. Hagrid gave her a surprised look. Me? Married? He looked wistful for a moment. Nah, he said, witches, Ave never given me a second glance. A sad expression drifted momentarily across his face. You can't tell the future, Sweetie Belle said. It's better to be prepared for the future than be caught out. Scudaloo smirked, then snickered with a sidelong glance at her herdmates. I think you're underselling yourself, Hagrid. The others looked at her. She shrugged, according to my aunts, regardless of what Mares tell stallions, size matters. She narrowed her eyes and looked up at Hagrid. If you're as big as you appear, once the witches discover you're available, there'll be a line out your door all the way to the Hogwarts gates. Scudaloo, came the scandalized responses from the other girls. Hermione and Ginny were blushing furiously, the other two were more surprised just to hear her be so outspoken on this subject. Innuendo was not a specialty for the Pegasus, quite the opposite, in fact. On the other hoof, the fillies thought, maybe with her new, bigger wings, to attract attention, her aunts might have been a bit livelier when talking about stallions, and what she might want to do. Or with whom? Harry, Ron, and Neville stared at her, gobsmacked. Luna merely looked intrigued. Having seen a few copies of the news parchment her father printed, The Quibbler, Harry had a horrible feeling that a future article would cover the sizes of the various talking species willies. And the mating habits of Pegasi. You need to stop in at the Three Broomsticks and tell MDM Rosmerta that you're looking for a little companionship. She might have a few suggestions, Scudaloo continued earnestly. The twins say she knows practically everyone in Hogsmeade. It was Hagrid's turn to blush red. He ran a rough hand through his hair. I don't know about the ... he said quietly. Stop in at the bookstore in Hogsmeade and ask the bookseller if he has any books on meeting witches, said Hermione, startling herself, and blushing a bit redder. I'm sure a book would offer many suggestions on how to present yourself without being discouraged or embarrassed. The boys exchanged horrified glances. What was going on? How had they gotten from there to here? Anyway, Sweetie Belle said, just because you don't need galleons today doesn't mean you won't need them tomorrow. Desperate to get the topic to safe ground, Harry put it, yeah, just send an owl to Filthy Rich, in Ponyville, Equestria. Tell him I suggested you two get together about a deal with Acromantula silk. Then, take along a couple of pounds of silk as a sample, and an estimate as to how much you can salvage. I'm sure there's a lot from their abandoned nest that wasn't burned. If he's interested in a long-term arrangement, maybe you could work out a deal with the spiders. Trade them sheep or cows for quantities of their silk. I'm sure they'd be happy to give you their excess in exchange, he said, for an assured method of getting plenty of food in the future. That way they won't come into conflict with the others who make their homes in the Forbidden Forest simply because their nest got too big, he concluded. The conversation sort of petered out after that. The boys and Hagrid were getting embarrassed about the topic they were on, and the girls were not doing much better. Then Hagrid said, I hear you're an animagus, to Luna. Silently blessing the half-giant, the boys quickly dove into an explanation of what had happened on the train, and what Harry's mum had discovered. He had never been so happy before to leave a conversation behind. He couldn't help looking at Scudaloo with a new awareness. He uncomfortably wondered how he measured up and if he could do anything about it if he didn't. Would they have a book in the library? Where would he even look? He could feel himself blushing and the fillies giving him occasional curious glances. From their expressions, Harry thought Neville and Ron were similarly perplexed. That was one topic he would never ask Hermione, or any of the others in the herd, for help in searching the library. Fortunately, Luna was soon showing off her new and appealing form to Hagrid's admiring examination. "I never seen anything like that," he said, studying her from every angle as she stood on his table. "I 'spect it muse be your magic that be letting people see through ya, be you not revealin' your insides," he mused. "Wings is a pretty piece o' work, too. Bet there's tiny hairs on that helps yer actually pick up on wind currents to help yer glide and fly like bats do." He studied her wings for a moment. "Your lack o' feathers means ye aren't as noisy as birds in flight." He pondered for a few seconds. "You're probably as quiet as an owl in flight," he stated. "Real good at stealth." Luna wasn't quite preening, but she was soaking up the attention he was devoting to her. Harry didn't notice the displeased expressions his herdmates were giving him as he stared at the glittering pony. Were her wings really covered in tiny hairs, like most people's arms? Then she started asking questions, and the two of them quickly left the rest behind as they started talking about rarer and rarer creatures. Harry and the others left the filly and the half-giant deep in a discussion about Snorkax and where they might be found. Luna was saying they lived in the far north, but Hagrid suggested, based on what she had described, small, purple, four-hooved, twisted horn on the forehead, and a long tail, that they probably lived much farther south, perhaps Lower Siberia. Headmaster Dumbledore genially looked over the professors in their meeting room as they settled down into their seats. The new professors were fitting in nicely, he observed. It was the first Friday of the month instead of the usual second. He wanted to nip any problems in the bud. A more thorough professorial assessment of their new students, the new aides, and the returning students would be next week. Sometimes, early acknowledgement of possible issues could prevent severe problems, later. An ounce of prevention, and all that. Especially with so many foreign first years. The aides were scheduled for a meeting on Saturday morning, to get their views on how the first week of school had gone. Remus, he was pleased to see, showed none of the signs that he had been a werewolf, or that a full moon was even coming next week. The wizard had already explained to everyone that traveling to Atlantis seemed to have driven the werewolf curse out of him. He had spent the last full moon in a ministry holding cell to prove to the naysayers that he wouldn't transform. He had played poker with the Aurors all night, as a wizard. Her had lost heavily, but he didn't care. By every measure and test the ministry could apply, Lupin was not a werewolf. The only sign he might have been one were the scars that decorated his body. Fortunately for him, and unfortunately for them, many of the older Aurors had quite a few more scars. If no one told them beforehand, the typical wizard, or witch, would assume that had been, or was, his job. Or possibly a hit wizard. The ministry had reluctantly removed his name from the known werewolves list. Even more reluctantly, they had issued a letter stating, unequivocally, that he wasn't a werewolf. The Atlanteans had already conducted a second trial in which 7 other werewolves had been cured. It was conceivable that within a generation, or two, the werewolf curse would become a thing of the past. Something truly to look forward to happening. At the very least, the numbers would fall to the point of being nearly a non-issue. "Thank you all," Albus said jovially, "for your hard work so far this year." The murmured conversations quickly ceased. He shook his head wryly. "I know I had warned you that we would be getting a few students from Atlantis this term, but I have to say that I did not expect the number of students who did arrive. I doubt that since the founding of Hogwarts have we seen the incoming class double from one year to the next." He smiled as they all nodded, except Severus Snape, the newly promoted Newt-level potions professor, who scowled. "On that note, have we noticed any issues with the Atlanteans?" He looked expectantly around the room. "They seem to be most curious," said his depute headmistress, Professor McGonagall. "They are very attentive in class, and not shy about asking questions. The non-unicorn assignments are very messy, however. I suggest we set up a class on weekends in the art of writing, as most of them are unfamiliar with how to use quills." I've seen many actually using their mouths to manipulate their quills, and doing a much better job of writing than using their hand. She looked a bit perplexed at that issue, as most of them were. How do you manipulate a quill that way? The unicorns use their magic to manipulate the quills, she added. She shook her head slightly, to get herself back on topic. Being foreigners, their spelling and grammar leaves much to be desired, so perhaps a dictionary of the words they can be expected to see might be in order, as well. She paused a moment. I suggest we put together a pre-Hogwarts class in August for the next incoming groups of first years where we could concentrate on writing and grammar. It could be held in Atlantis for their convenience, or we could hold it here, in Hogwarts, to make it easier for them to adapt to their new forms and being in a new world. She frowned, thinking. I know it took me several months to truly get comfortable with my animagus form. I can't imagine the pressure of also dealing with learning an entirely new society so different from their own. Professor Pomona Sprout, the head of house for the Hufflepuffs, snorted. That they don't really understand our society is evident. I'm still hearing from my prefects about finding them wandering around sans clothing, or running around in their animagus form, and when told to revert to human it turns out they never dressed before leaving their dorm room. Professor Flitwick, head of the Ravenclaw house, sighed. One of my prefects, Miss Penelope Clearwater, told me she found one of the Atlantean first years wandering around the common room and lifting her robes to show she wasn't wearing anything underneath because she thought it was funny the way the older students would turn red and run away. The girls simply did not understand why Miss Clearwater was upset. She was, as she put it, just showing off my cutie mark. He shook his head. She claimed there wasn't anything unusual about that at home, and she wasn't showing off anything that was private. Besides, she wouldn't be in season until spring, anyway. Poppy Pomfrey, the matron in charge of the hospital wing, sighed and buried her head in her hands. I'll schedule a PBRTY class for the Atlanteans for tomorrow, and explain that humans don't have seasons, they are always fertile unless they take a CNTRCP-TV or use a CNTRCP-TV spell, she said dejectedly. Please tell all the first-year Atlanteans that attendance is mandatory. Girls will be in the late morning, at 10, and boys in the early afternoon, at 1. Shall I inform the Atlantean aides? Asked the headmaster. Poppy gave him a startled look. Yes, they might be able to help explain the differences between here and there. And I can clear up any misunderstandings they might have, too. I'll add that lecture to the pre-Hogwarts class schedule, Minerva added dryly. Albus nodded and looked over to Professor Horace Slughorn, the Slytherin head of house, raising his eyebrows inquisitively. Horace cleared his throat. Ignoring the aforementioned issues, he shook his head. Discovering that all the Atlanteans can trace their families' histories back at least 1,000 years, if not double or triple that, has even the most conservative upper years reconsidering their family's position. He chuckled. Most can't go back more than 400 or 500 years. My Slytherins have been forced to rethink their entire position on purebloods, half-bloods, and Muggleborn. By the conservatives' own logic, the Atlanteans could consider almost everyone in Slytherin house to be a new half-BLD. Fortunately, the Atlanteans don't even seem to understand what the issue is, much less why it should matter. Also confusing the wizards and witches is how the Atlanteans are so cheerful and forthright, he concluded. They almost seem incapable of the cunning and plotting that have been the mainstay of the Slytherin house for generations. He smiled. Except they were sorted into the house by the hat. That has the upper years in a quandary. Are the Atlanteans really that naive? Or are they playing a long game that the non-equestrians can't fathom, as yet? Albus nodded his understanding and leaned back in his chair. As you have probably noticed, he said conversationally, that there are only 9 boys and 30 girls in the group, matching the original 1-to-3 ratio of Harry and his herdmates. The group exchanged looks and their brows wrinkled, thinking over the possibilities. Severus gave him a steady look, then suddenly his eyebrows rose in surprise. A moment later, a couple of others saw to the center of the subject. Precisely, the Dumbledore confirmed, nodding. According to the books I've had purchased and returned from Atlantis, the ratio of males to females in Atlantis is 1 to 3. He smiled softly. I suspect that for most of the girls, their long game is tilted more in the direction of acquiring a capable husband, one that complements their own skills or goals, than any other single aim. After all, what the princesses want from them is a record of their experiences so they can design their own schools of magic. With the correct partner they could propel themselves into the top ranks of their society. After all, they are, according to Princess Sparkle, the smartest, bravest, and most ambitious of the 1,000 children who volunteered to come to Hogwarts. They did not win their positions because of family influence or wealth. They are, from the few I've spoken to, all commoners from poor or average families. Obviously, Severus said snidely. They want to make an impression. Albus looked at his professors with raised eyebrows. I suppose it would be like scheming to find the right potions partner to help you get the attention of the Flammels as sponsors to your research. More than one person looked startled at the thought. He leaned forward. Our society, where the ratio of male to female is equal, must seem like a paradise to them. A witch can marry a wizard, and not need to share. As a result of that inequity of the sexes, their society is a matriarchy. An inverse of our own society. The males are more likely to find themselves in charge of the children while the women are at the forefronts of those duties we, here, consider wizards' work. From my readings, they view the males as vain, impulsive, emotional, and illogical. It is their job to watch over their men, to save them from their own follies, if you will. It is not by accident that their two rulers are women, that the mayors of their cities are women, that the current heroes of the nation are all young women. He chuckled. The males seem to spend most of their time getting into predicaments that require a mayor to rescue them. One of my informants in Equestria told me that he frequently ran into the men, the stallions, being at the forefront of the business, issuing orders, and running things in general. However, the truth, he said, was like the husband who says, I wear the trousers in this family, don't I, honey? The witches in the room were all smirking. On the other hand, I've noted that their guard, the equivalent of our aurors, seems to be heavily invested in men. Plus, many of their villains are men, as well. He paused. It's an odd dynamic. He shook his head. The Atlanteans also seem to mature faster. Both sexes, actually, seem to be about 2 years ahead of where wizards and witches are in relation to PBRTY. Which means that even though they are 11, the age I told the princesses was the usual lower limit to begin a magical education, they are 13 in mental and physical growth and outlook. They will act far more mature than their age mates in the dorms. He sighed. They also seem to prefer their pony forms in Atlantis over their human forms. Being quadrupeds, and furred, they are far more blasé about NDTY. Hence, their proclivity for failing to dress in the mornings. And disrobing in public without a thought. The professors exchanged evaluating looks. Pomona looked over to Phileas. That one girl Miss Clearwater mentioned may not have been as innocent as she claimed. She could have been gauging the reactions of the wizards in the house with an eye towards who to watch in the future as a potential husband. Albus stared at the tabletop for a minute before looking back up. We shall have to monitor things closely, He stroked his beard. As I said, these children were chosen out of the 1,000 volunteers they had that were the appropriate age. He sighed. I suspect you will find them at the top of every class in a few weeks. He smiled genially. After all, if we could choose 39 students out of 1,000 11-year-olds to send to a foreign school to learn a new magic, wouldn't we choose the best? His eyes were twinkling as he said, I imagine that setting up a school system to handle the many thousands of students they have will take a few decades, if not a century. In the meantime, Hogwarts will be the school for their elite, not the richest, not the most influential, but the smartest, bravest, and most ambitious, as we have the best magical professors. With a bit of work, we can make Hogwarts into the school that everyone, and every pony, looks to when someone mentions the premier magical school of the world. There were several moments' silence as everyone considered the issue. Now, that that's sorted, he prompted, looking back up with a twinkle in his eyes. How are our new wizards and witches settling in? The discussion continued for another hour. Before they broke up, however, the headmaster had one more announcement. On Wednesday, as you no doubt remember, we were graced with the presences of Princesses Luna and Sparkle. Both were here in response to an action by the equestrian they refer to as the God of Chaos. It seems he made an appearance on the Hogwarts Express just as it left the station for Hogsmeade. The other professors sat straighter and focused a bit more on him. Dumbledore smiled gently. Apparently, the God of Chaos is a bit of a prankster, and was offended that neither a crystal pony nor a night pony had been included in the allotment of ponies to attend Hogwarts. He took it upon himself to remedy that oversight. He sighed. One would think that the easiest way to disrupt things would be to bring in 2 more students. He had their full attention. Instead, he chose a human witch, and bestowed upon her an animagus form that was a blend of the crystal and night ponies, just as he gave the Weasleys animagus forms. The staff exchanged incredulous looks. A night pony, I've been informed, is basically a Pegasus, but with enhanced night vision, cat-like eyes, enhanced hearing, and leathery wings. The incredulous looks increased in amplitude. Eyes twinkling, Albus continued. A crystal pony is the same as an earth pony, except their fur appears crystalline, and they are translucent. Minerva nodded as Snape scoffed. I saw the pony in question. Her wings are membranes, not feathers, and covered in tiny hairs you can barely see. If you look at her, you can see the background through her. Interestingly, there are darker areas on her body, but her internal organs are actually invisible to the eye. The darker areas appear to both random in shape and placement, and move about. What that means, I don't know. Who is it? Interrupted Phileas, the charms professor. Luna Lovegood, Minerva answered. Everyone in the room except the headmaster gave a long-suffering sigh. Her father has been informed, and will be here this weekend to meet with her. She shook her head wryly. I imagine she will be the cover of his next Quibbler. They were silent, considering what that would mean for the small conspiracy-oriented publication. The reason I bring this up now, Albus picked up the conversation, is because of what Princess Sparkle did when she came on Wednesday. He looked around the room at each of the professors. For the moment, I must ask you to keep this quiet, he said slowly. As you know, Harry Potter and his friends went with Miss Lovegood and the princesses. Princess Twilight cast several diagnostic spells on everyone in the room, myself and Minerva included. She did this on both our normal selves and as animagi. She later told me in a letter that having a spread of the animagi magic in equestrians and wizards allowed her to see what the God of Chaos had done, and how. Everyone leaned back in surprise, before leaning forward to listen even more intently than before. He sighed. She then offered Miss Myrtle Warren a choice of unicorn, Pegasus, or earth pony forms for her animagus. Miss Warren chose winged. He was silent a moment, thinking. They waited impatiently for him to continue. Princess Sparkle then cast a spell that turned Miss Warren into a Pegasus animagi. With several of us coaching her, she was able to MSTR transforming back and forth in about an hour. The professors were staring at him, gobsmacked. He nodded slowly. There is now a spell that can be used to turn almost any wizard or witch into a pony animagus. He paused. Regrettably, it is not a spell that anyone but the most powerful wizards can cast. Princess Twilight fell asleep immediately afterwards, exhausted, and Princess Luna had to carry her home. He shook his head. Based on what she told me, I doubt even I could cast the spell. He paused again. She did mention that she was exploring methods that might make it easier, even possibly making it a ritual that could use power crystals instead of drawing from the caster. The simplest would be to activate the innate animagus form instead of imposing a pony form. That had the potential of being the easiest spell for her to create, she said. My word, half-whispered Horace. Anyone? The headmaster nodded. Anyone capable of becoming an animagus could benefit from the spell. He sighed again. She said she hoped to have it complete in a week. She wanted to run the calculations by one of the professors at their magical school. My word, Horace repeated, stunned. Quite, Albus said. I'm telling you all this so you may answer any questions the students might have, and in an attempt to forestall the worst of the rumors. Should any parents ask you about this, you can tell them that yes, such a spell exists, but it is of such difficulty that I, myself, cannot do it. They were silent for several minutes, and then the meeting began to break up. It was the biggest shock of his new life when he had walked into the corridor that led to what he had been told were Myrtle Warren's toilets. Instead of a "closed for repairs" sign on the toilet's door, as he had been told to expect, he had discovered his chamber of secrets had been turned into a tourist attraction. With sign-up sheets posted. The sign affixed to the wall beside the door explained the schedule for student tours, which he had made sure to note. He was fortunate that more students were taken with the equestrians than with the novelty of the Chamber of Secrets. Thus, his name had been at the top of the list. The first tour would be that Friday afternoon. For the past 3 days since that discovery on Tuesday, he could think of nothing else as he waited, hidden. How had they found it? How had they accessed it? Plus, it was only last year that they did it, too. It must have been the doings of those equestrians. Why hadn't that oaf Malfoy informed him of this terrible deed? What his older self had seen in the incompetent idiot was beyond him. It was clear the oversight had been on purpose. Bad faith was living up to his name. He obviously had no idea what the diary was, what that meant, and what it could do. He probably thought it was a pale imitation of a wizarding portrait. Voldemort would apprise him of his error at a later date. With a suitable punishment. Perhaps, forcing him to use his son for cursed target practice for a few hours every day until the boy cowered in fear at the very sight of his father. Yes. That might be adequate. The screaming would be soothing to his pride, at least. But for now, it changed his plans completely. He couldn't savor the terror and despair of his enemies, and the Muggleborns, as he threw Hogwarts into disarray for the rest of the year, distracting them while he gained strength. He would have to search out another hidden spot to complete the final transformation and his triumphant return. Perhaps the Forbidden Forest. That had its own problems regarding safety, though. The last thing he needed was a centaur or other animal stumbling upon him before the ritual was completed. An attack when he was vulnerable would be disastrous. Anywhere in the castle proper was right out, the new detection spells they had been told about would pick that up immediately. Not to mention their usage of the room of requirement for astronomy classes and indoor recreation the rest of the time. With its near-constant use, he couldn't even check to see if his Horcrux was there. The lack of any rumors about a room of lost things gave him hope it hadn't been found. The new auto-updating map of the school meant he couldn't sneak out of the dorm in the middle of the night without the prefects immediately noticing and intercepting him either. The warm water swimming pool was nice, though. He needed a location that wasn't under constant and direct surveillance, and couldn't be quickly accessed by his enemies if they discovered what he was doing. Which meant it had to be outside the castle and its near grounds. He needed a way to get Fumbledork out of the castle, too. His plan of slowly escalating the situation until the headmaster was removed for incompetence just became incredibly difficult, if not impossible. Especially with those bloody equestrians everywhere. He had spotted no fewer than a dozen adult spies. At least half of them were their equivalent of Aurors, just from the way they moved and kept watch, despite everyone else calling them professorial aides. As it was, learning that the dark artifact detection spells had been upgraded had complicated things. Still, nothing he hadn't been able to trick with the right spells. A drop of BLD sealed the deal. As far as the spells were concerned, he wasn't separate from his victim, he was a part of them. As a result, while he might have a severely dark aura, bordering on black, he wasn't separate from his host person anymore. He wasn't a dark artifact, merely a dark aspect of the host, a smaller part, truly. Regrettably, while his soul was hidden behind strong magics, the spells leaked enough to set off the detectors under normal circumstances. However, with the BLD connection, the leaks were small enough to be diluted in his victim's soul aura, and unnoticeable unless one looked directly into the mind of the victim for signs of possession. As a result, his host had only a slight darkening of their aura, nothing that would set off the detector spells. Fumbledork's passive and mild mind grazing would see nothing untoward. Later, as he drained more and more of his victim's life force, that would change and he ran the risk of detection. He needed to stay low and unnoticeable. However, as long as he didn't cast any non-school dark spells, he could reduce his risk to the minimum. If he held back the possession, kept as much of his renewed soul in the diary behind the masking spells, he should be safe. The spells looked for a strong dark aura overshadowing a lighter aura, not a lighter aura that continuously became smaller and weaker over the months. It was a pity to sacrifice a pure BLD. No it wasn't. He smirked. How delicious that he would finally have a true pure BLD body. They had looked down on him for being a half BLD, at first. Treated him as something barely above a mud BLD until he had learned enough magic to show them the error of their ways. He'd get his revenge on them, oh, yes, he would. He'd have to start over, again, but that was merely an inconvenience. Soon enough, he would be back in power, and ready to take over Wizarding England, just as he had been when he had encountered the impossible. Defeated by a baby, they said. A baby? Defeat him? Impossible. But that's what everyone said and the books claimed. He would find the truth. Once the tour began, he was very upset to hear the story of how the professors had determined the location of the hidden entrance, then routed his pet, the basilisk. They had been very thorough in exploring the chamber, and nothing remained undiscovered. The entire chamber had been meticulously examined, and cleaned. Salazar's office had been found, and now everyone was allowed a moment to peer inside at the ancient refuge of the great wizard. The original scrolls had been removed, he could tell, and now fakes filled the diamond-shaped cubbyholes that lined one wall. He smirked. Fortunately, he had removed and studied the truly important ancient documents 50 years ago. They were safely stored in one of his hidden safe houses under appropriate charms. Those plebeians hadn't discovered Salazar Slytherin's true secrets. The ones he had left behind had been either duplicates or not worth the effort. It was interesting to see that the old fools had padded out the cubbies with far more scrolls than he had left behind. Disappointingly, the one hidden cubbyhole he was able to access had been discovered and cleaned out, as well. He assumed the rest had been found. He was unable to check the others because the prefect guiding the tour might notice his unauthorized exploring. In any event, he wouldn't be able to search for the remaining secret places until much later. Doing so anytime soon might reveal him to the detection spells set all over the vast chamber if he came when there weren't any tours. Not to mention that the chamber was also on their thrice-damned school map. He had to admit Fumbledork had done a comprehensive job of making sure no one made an unauthorized entry. It was disgusting. Something so impressive and magnificent, brought down to a mere diversion. He pretended to be awed at what he saw, but inside he boiled with rage that non-Slytherins were trampling all over his heritage. Half-bloods, BLD traitors, and Muggleborn, despoiling it with their uncomprehending eyes. His hand kept twitching towards his wand, but he knew he dared not do anything just yet. He would make them pay for such disrespect. Dearly. Harry had been looking forward to the weekend. Unfortunately, today, it wasn't his herdmates waking him up. It was Oliver Wood, the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Grumbling at Oliver's enthusiasm for the sport that prompted waking up literally at the break of dawn, 6 in the morning on a Saturday, Harry dressed in his Quidditch robes. Normally, this wouldn't happen until after tryouts later this month. However, last year, the first years had been given the unprecedented option to try out. Thus, the normal second-year tryouts were unnecessary. The qualified second years were already either on the team as players or reserves. Hence, why delay starting the practices? At least that was Oliver's reasoning. Yawning widely, Ron, the reserve keeper, joined him. When he made it to the common room, it was to see his herdmates, also yawning and rubbing the sleep from their eyes, coming down the stairs, too. After a few moments commiserating their loss of a lay-in, they started out for the pitch. Colin suddenly came barreling down the stairs and across the room, waving a piece of paper. It was the photograph of him and Colin, and it was moving. Colin alternated between looking at the picture and looking at Harry. Harry in the picture smiled, nodded, and waved out at them. "I heard you coming down the stairs. I just printed it last night," he exclaimed proudly. "Do you think you could sign it now?" Harry considered. "I don't have a quill on me, at the moment. Why don't you develop and print the rest, and then I can sign them all in one batch?" At Colin's indecisive look, Harry added, "Besides, I'm off to Quidditch practice, right now." Oh. I've never seen a Quidditch game." He barely paused before saying, "You're the youngest Quidditch player in 100 years, aren't you?" He trotted alongside the group as they made their way out the portrait hole. "What's it like?" "No," Harry said, "I'm not the youngest Quidditch player, that's Ginny Weasley." He nodded at the girl to one side behind Scootaloo. "She was on the team as a reserve last year, and she was only 10 at the time." Colin gave the girl a wide-eyed look. 10. Yes, she was given special permission to start Hogwarts early on account of her mastering the Animagus transformation so early. Colin's eyes grew wider. "Really?" he said incredulously, his voice going up a full octave. He tagged along with them as Harry gave a brief explanation of her being shown how to access her Animagus form by a powerful wizard, and then how she had learned to do it herself. Then the discussion turned to Quidditch, and how it had 7 players. 1 keeper to guard the goals, 2 beaters who hit ball called bludgers at the opposing team members, 3 chasers who took a ball called a quaffle and tried to score points, and a seeker who looked for a tiny, winged, golden ball, called a snitch, that ended the game. Colin went to sit on the stands overhead as the rest went into their Quidditch changing room. Disappointingly, Wood spent almost a full hour explaining the plays he had designed over the summer. He had just finished when George Weasley, one of the beaters, said tiredly, "Oliver, why couldn't you have told us all this last night when we were awake?" He gave a big, jaw-cracking yawn. Oliver was not amused. He grabbed his broomstick and headed outside for the field. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. The brisk morning air finally finished waking Harry up as the rest were doing their drills, and he began looking around more alertly. He saw Colin sitting in one of the highest seats in the stadium, his camera raised. The sound of the shutter clicking was clear in the still morning air. Colin waved a hand and called out shrilly, "Look this way, Harry." Harry waved genially. He saw Oliver glancing quizzically between Harry and Colin, and not looking very happy. Harry shot across the stadium at speed, and pulled up beside Wood at the goal posts. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning. "Who's that taking pictures?" He turned and glared at the little first tie. "He could be a Slytherin spy, trying to find out about our new training program," he said loudly. "Nah," Harry said dismissively, "he's just taking pictures for his family. So, they can see the awesomeness that is Quidditch. He's a Gryffindor." Oliver grumbled, and kept casting suspicious eyes on the little wizard for the next 2 hours as they ran through his new plays. Harry idly noticed that the stands were slowly accumulating students from all 4 houses. So much for keeping Oliver's new plays a secret. Students with brightly colored hair predominated. Several had transformed into ponies and were hovering over the stands, pacing the broomstick riders. This was likely the winged pony's first exposure to Quidditch. While it was slowly gaining popularity among the Pegasi in Canterlot, Cloudsdale, and Ponyville, the rest of Equestria had never had the opportunity to see a game. From the excited arm-waving of the students with more normal colors to their hair, he knew the Pegasi would be occupying the stadium whenever the teams weren't. The reserves had completed one such run-through on a new play and the Gryffindor team was moving to group up to critique their performance. Harry saw a movement out of the corner of his eyes. When he looked, he saw 7 people in green robes walk onto the field. They were carrying their broomsticks. Wood noticed almost immediately. "What?" he yelled, coming to halt and floating in place. We have the field today. He shot toward the interlopers. Harry and the rest followed a bit more slowly. Flint. Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain, staggering a bit from jumping off his broom a bit sooner than he should have. Clear off. We booked the field 2 weeks ago. For the entire day. Harry glanced at Wood. 2 weeks ago. Before school started. How had he done that? Wait. The entire day. He looked at the castle. Breakfast was almost over, and he was starving. He turned and looked at Wood with narrowed eyes. Had he planned to work them through breakfast and lunch? Marcus Flint was bigger than Wood by several inches, and more heavily built. Plenty of room for us all, Wood. He didn't sneer, but it looked like he wanted to. But I booked the field for the day, said Wood, positively spitting with rage. I booked it. Flint gave Wood a surprised look. You did? I didn't know that, he said in a way that implied he did, indeed, know that. Doesn't matter, though, he said airily. Professor Snape gave us a specially signed note that gives us permission to use the field to train our new seeker. He held up a piece of parchment. A new seeker. A new seeker. Wood said, distracted. Where? He said suspiciously. That was when they saw Draco Malfoy. He had been hiding behind the larger and older team members. An easy job, as he was only a second year, like Harry and the Gryffindor reserve players. Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son? Said Wood, staring at Malfoy, puzzled. Flint, and the rest of the Slytherin team smiled more broadly. Funny that, he said. He's quite the Quidditch fan, it turns out. Look at the generous gift he's made. All 7 of them presented their broomsticks. 7 highly polished, brand new handles, with fine gold lettering spelling the words Nimbus 2001, gleamed under the Gryffindors' noses in the early morning sun. The latest model, don't you know? Only came out last month, said Flint casually, flicking an imaginary speck of dust from the end of his own. Quite an improvement over all other brooms, I'm told. Oh, cool, said Scootaloo, stepping closer to inspect one of the brooms. Now we can have a real game. Last year, with these Nimbus 2000s, it sort of felt unfair against the other school brooms. She gestured with her broomstick. Sweetie Belle nodded. Yeah. She frowned a moment, then a smile lit up her face. I know, let's get Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff new brooms. That way, it won't matter which brooms you've got, only your skill. Oh, that's a great idea. Apple Bloom said enthusiastically. We can make the order out over breakfast, and get it in their hooves by Monday, said Sweetie Belle happily. The Slytherins lost their smiles, as did Wood. For different reasons. Ron's stomach growled loudly, echoed a moment late by Harry's. They both blushed as the girls sniggered. They started for the castle. Wait, said Wood, we've got practice. I booked the whole day. Harry turned and stared at Wood with narrowed eyes. You were planning on stopping for breakfast, right? All he got was a blank look. You wanted us to practice all day without a break, he said incredulously. Even the Slytherins looked surprised at the thought. Wood just glared back at him. We need the practice if we want to win games, he stated. Especially, he glared at the Slytherins, if they aren't using their regular broomsticks. You did make arrangements with the elves to bring us breakfast and lunch, right? Harry said accusingly. Again, his answer was a blank look. He growled in the back of his throat. He turned back to the Slytherins. How about this, Flint, he said, we're going to head in for breakfast. You have the field from now, he glanced at his watch, 9 until noon, since we had it from 6 till now. Then you can go in for lunch and we'll take the field from noon till 3 while you eat and recover. Then we'll swap and you have the field from 3 till dinner. Does that sound fair? Or, maybe, Scootaloo said, we could have a pickup game after lunch. She looked at Flint with an encouraging and hopeful smile. Flint looked at the others on his team, then shrugged. Wood was looking back and forth between them. "Hey," he said, "wait a minute." Harry nodded at Flint, then started off the field. The reserves and Ron quickly followed him. "But I booked the field for the entire day," wailed Wood. The twins were giving him disgusted looks. "If you think we're going to practice all day without eating," said one. "Or a break, then you're barmy," finished the other. They both started after Harry's group. The three chasers followed them, leaving Wood gaping, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. The Slytherins were giving the chasers leering looks as they passed each other. Harry, glancing back, saw this. "I'll be just a second," he said out loud, and trotted back to the Slytherins, who curiously watched him approach. As soon as he got close enough, he said, in a quiet voice that they could barely hear, "You know, if you think the fillies are good-looking in the Quidditch uniforms, you should see them in the changing rooms. You should get a few fillies on your reserve team." He looked at them with raised eyebrows, right? He didn't wait for a response, he turned and trotted back to his friends. He looked back just as he left the stadium. Wood stood abandoned on the field and was watching the Slytherins flying overhead on their brooms. Shaking his head, he slowly started for the exit and Hogwarts. Harry shook his head, too, but for a different reason. While Oliver might think Quidditch was the be-all and end-all of the purpose of being at Hogwarts, everyone else didn't. If the Quidditch captain wasn't careful, he'd lose the support of the reserve players and they'd quit. That would mean losing the Quidditch Cup for the year if anyone got hurt during a game and they had to play one person down. Their opponent would steamroller them into the ground before the snitch could be caught. Wood might think that a tragedy, but very few others would. Unlike previous meetings, this one was, in the field, as it were. They were at the Audubon Army Training Estate, a live-fire military training estate in northern England. The group composed of John Major, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Hurd, the Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Kenneth Wilfred Baker, Field Marshal Sir John Chappell, and himself, Second Lieutenant Searle. The rest of the aides and security detail had been left in the command bunker. The Prime Minister cast a critical eye on Searle. "I hope this trip is as important as your note said." He took a glance around at the vacant target practice range, and the empty fields around them. At 34 square miles, Audubon was the largest such military range in the country. "It is Saturday, I had to cancel several very important meetings." Searle took a deep breath. "It is, sir, it is. Almost as important as the last time I told you of an important meeting." That got him a raised eyebrow. Their last such meeting had been the introduction to the cross-space equestrians, or maybe cross-dimensional, they didn't know which, yet requesting an embassy in London. Castor reached into his pocket and took a small cigarette case out. He opened and removed a small replica of the standard SA-80A2 rifle used by the military, then replaced the case in his pocket. He pressed a small button on the replica. The rest blinked as the tiny replica turned into a full-scale assault rifle with a large scope on top and a very short, barely visible, ammunition magazine. Most magazines were much larger, stretching the length of a person's forearm. He looked up at the others. "Princess Twilight was very happy to show me this. She said that this rifle would keep Equestria safe from its enemies for a very long time. She credited several of our ex-military special technology people with the ideas, and several Scottish graduates with the design and execution," he said solemnly. "They've already adapted these techniques to the new rifles their guard uses." He gave them a bleak look. "It is the single most terrifying weapon I have ever seen. The normal ES-80A2 has a magazine of 30 rounds, and a maximum rate of fire of a magazine a second. Normal, in the field, rate of fire is limited to how fast a soldier can exchange magazines. This rifle has no such restriction." He raised an eyebrow at the Prime Minister, and hefted the rifle. "May I demonstrate?" The others exchanged looks and put on their ear protectors. He took the forward position and aimed at the targets downrange from them by 100 meters. He took a deep breath, settled the rifle against his shoulder, slowly exhaled, and gently pulled the trigger. The rifle was set to full automatic, and with such a tiny ammunition magazine it only should fire 5 shots maybe. At least, that's what the others must think, he knew. How wrong they were. He held the trigger down. The rifle fired a steady stream of bullets. Sir John raised both his eyebrows. He knew the sound of that rifle on full automatic, and this was not the same. It should have stopped after a second. It was more like a machine gun. At the 2-minute mark, Castor stopped. There wasn't much left of his chosen target, just thin wisps of paper flapping in the air. His voice shook a bit. 1,000 rounds a minute. Unlimited. The magazine has only 1 round in it. When you go to chamber the first round, the special technology duplicates the original and that is what goes into the chamber. The duplicated round requires only a small amount of energy to create as it will vanish after 1 minute. There's a power unit in the magazine to help. He grabbed the barrel of the rifle, which should have been far too hot to hold, and held it out to the minister. There is a cooling technology on the barrel and chamber to prevent excessive heating. There's also a spell to completely suppress muzzle flash. The Prime Minister gingerly accepted the weapon, then gave Castor a startled look as he almost tossed the rifle over his own shoulder. The rifle weighs approximately 3 ounces, the second lieutenant continued. Special technology is used to reduce its weight, and absorb and stabilize any rifle recoil. Chamber recoil is left alone so there's no recoil creep, sore shoulders, or vibrations to throw off your aim. Other special technology makes it almost impervious to damage. It could hold a Challenger 2 tank from the trigger guard, if you had a cable small enough and strong enough to fit. It's waterproof, and permanently oiled and greased. There is also a silencer component, which I did not turn on. He took another shuddering breath. The scope crosshairs show exactly where the rounds will hit. You can carve your name into a target at 400 meters. Only a soldier trained in special technology can fire it. It can be personalized to the soldier so that if it falls into enemy hands, they can't use it even if they have their own special technology experts. Neither can it be disassembled and reverse engineered without it violently exploding. The other 4 were staring at him in shock. Oh, no, he shook his head, there's more. He held out his hand for the rifle. He popped out the magazine, which was green, and plugged in another that was yellow. This magazine uses the same duplication technology, he said, lifting the rifle to firing position. The others hurriedly replaced their ear protectors. He didn't hold the trigger for more than 10 seconds, but it was long enough to obliterate, in large explosions, most of the targets down range from them. He popped out the magazine and turned to look at his superiors. Those were 40mm grenades. The original has been shrunk, an action that is applied to the duplicate as it is generated. The shrinking is cancelled as the round leaves the barrel. The muzzle velocity is the same as the regular 5.56mm rounds, 940 meters per second, 1,000 rounds per minute. They were openly gaping at him. He pulled a red magazine out of his pocket and held it up for them to see. He did not place it in the rifle. This magazine is loaded with a 155mm high-energy tank round, same conditions as the other 2 magazines. He put the magazine back in his pocket as he said, "There's a 4th magazine for 50 caliber rounds and a 5th that is a flamethrower." He turned a recessed knob on the stock, then pressed it in, and was holding a tiny version of the rifle again. The knob was now the button he had pressed earlier. He put it back in his cigarette case and took out a miniature pistol, a Glock 17. He held it up. This does everything the ES-A80A2 does, except the accuracy is only 100 meters, not 400, and there is no scope, currently. He put it back in the cigarette case. The princess promised they would have those defects fixed, shortly. He looked at them bleakly. Imagine an assassin with a pistol or rifle like this. What security agent would think a charm bracelet or earring was a deadly weapon? With the bullets, shells, and gunpowder residue disappearing after a minute when the duplication technology dissipates, what evidence would be left for investigators? He sighed. Plus, there is no reason why this can't be adapted to the other branches. Imagine an undetectable impregnable supersonic fighter jet not much bigger than a Mini Cooper, with unlimited fuel, a dozen different built-in gun magazines with unlimited ammunition, and unlimited bombs of every type. The pilot could have unlimited food and drink, too. Or an undetectable impregnable Navy scimitar with unlimited range that can outmaneuver and outshoot a battleship and cruise at 200 km per hour. Or an undetectable, impregnable submarine that can stay underwater forever and sink anything that floats. Put a flow on the ships and the crew can spend their nights at home. Use a port key for the airplanes, and you could change crews without the plane ever having to land. He shook his head. We need to rethink our entire approach to the military and security. We have to keep these things out of the hands of our enemies and terrorists. We also need a way to detect them. Plus, convince the equestrians not to make any mention of this to anyone else. Major Tom studied the chart carefully. It listed the various times that their 4 experimental port keys had activated as their Bristol Bloodhound had shot into space and passed the moon. The first had been at 13,000 kilometers, the maximum distance a port key on Earth had ever been used. The second port key had successfully activated at a distance of 200,000 kilometers halfway to the moon. The third port key had been set for the moon's orbit, 400,000 kilometers, another success. 12 days later, the fourth port key had safely arrived from 56 million kilometers, the distance at which Mars is closest to Earth. He was still waiting for the fifth port key. It was not due for another 55 days, when the rocket reached 402 million kilometers. That was the maximum range between Earth and Mars. If the sixth port key worked, as he hoped, 4 months and 22 days from now, it would pass Jupiter's orbit, leaving almost the entire asteroid ring between Earth and Mars open to exploration and exploitation. The problem was time. How long did such a port key take? The usage on Earth was well known, a few seconds, at most. Port keying to the shuttle, still parked in orbit, was easy. At perigee it was barely more than the distance from London to Frankfurt, Germany, or Galway, Ireland. The second and third port keys delivered definite numbers, to the hundredth of a second, 9 and 11 seconds. Almost exactly. The fourth had arrived 25.3 seconds after activation. If his calculations were right, that meant the fifth port key should take between 30.94 and 30.95 seconds. So, the farther you went, the faster the trip. Now, then, the only other variable was if you could survive the trip. Port keys were well known to get more dangerous as their distance increased. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 50. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.